All right, Chapter 5, Gwyon's Riddle. When with this complicated mythological argument slowly forming in my mind, I turned again to the Hans Taliesin, the Tale of Taliesin, the riddling poem with which Taliesin first addresses King Maelgwyn in the romance. I already suspected that Gwion was using the dog, the lapwing, and the roebuck to help him conceal in his riddle the new Gwyndonian secret of the trees, which he had somehow contrived to learn and which had invested him with poetic power. Reading the poem with care, I soon realized that here again, as in the Cadgadu, Gwion was no irresponsible rhapsodist, but a true poet, in that whereas Heenan and his fellow bards, as stated in the romance, knew only Latin, French, Welsh, and English, he was well read also in the Irish classics and in Greek and Hebrew literature too, as he himself claims. Tractor finnegafeg, Ephrai, Ephreg, Ephrag, Ephray. All right. I realized, too, that he was hiding an ancient religious mystery, a blasphemous one from the church's point of view, under the cloak of buffoonery, but had not made this secret altogether impossible for a well-educated fellow poet to guess. I here use the name Gwion for Taliesin to make it quite clear that I am not confusing the miraculous child Taliesin of the romance of Taliesin with the historic Taliesin of the late 6th century, a group of whose authentic poems is contained in the Red Book of Hergest, and who is noticed by Ninnis in a quotation from a 7th century genealogy of the Saxon kings as renowned in British poetry. The first Taliesin spent much of his time during the last third of the 6th century as a guest of various chiefs and princes to whom he wrote complimentary poems. Urin ap Sinovich, Owen ap Urin Gwalag ap Alanug, Sinin Garwin ap Brockfail, Yecthrog, king of Powys, and the High King Rune ap Maelgwyn until he was killed by the cooling in a drunken quarrel. He went with Rune in the first campaign against the men of the north, the occasion of which was the killing of Elder Heliodorus, Menwenfar, and the avenging raid of Clindo Eden, Riddlerk, Hal, or Hen, and others, to which Rune retaliated with a full-scale invasion. This Taliesin calls the English Ingle, or Dyfer, Dyrans, as often as he calls them Saxons, and the Welsh Brython, not Cymry, Gwion wrote about 6 centuries later at the close of the period of the princes. All right. In his lectures on early Welsh poetry, Dr. Ifor Williams, the greatest living authority on the text of the Taliesin poems, postulates from internal literary evidence that parts of the romance existed in a 9th century original. I do not dispute this or his conclusion that the author was a paganistic cleric with Irish connections, but must dispute his denial that there is any mysticism, semi-mysticism, or demi-semi-mysticism in the poems, and that the whole rigmarole can be easily explained as follows. Taliesin is just showing off like the kangaroo in Kipling's story. He had to. That was the role he had to play. As a scholar, Dr. Williams naturally feels more at home with the earlier Taliesin, who was a straightforward court bard of the skaldic sort. But the point of the romance to me is not that a pseudo-Taliesin humorously boasted himself omniscient, but that someone who styled himself Little Gwion, son of Gringrit Gwyring of Landfair in Saran Enion, a person of no importance, accidentally lighted on certain ancient mysteries, and, becoming an adept, began to despise the professional bards of his time because they did not understand the rudiments of their traditional poetic lore. Proclaiming himself a master poet, Gwion took the name of Taliesin as an ambitious Hellenistic Greek poet might have taken the name of Homer. Gwion, son of Ring, is itself probably a pseudonym, not the baptismal name of the author of the romance. Gwion is the equivalent for F of Fion or Finn, the Irish hero of a similar tale. Fion, son of Marine, a chief druid's daughter, was instructed by a druid of the same name as himself to cook for him a salmon fished from the deep pool of the river Boyne, and forbidden to taste it. But as Fion was turning the fish over in the pan, he burned his thumb, which he put into his mouth, and so received the gift of inspiration. For the salmon was a salmon of knowledge that had fed on nuts fallen from the 9 hazels of poetic art. The equivalent of Gwyring is frane, an established variant of fern, the alder. Gwion is thus claiming oracular powers of a spiritual son of the alder god Bran. His adoption of the pseudonym was justified by tradition. The hero Cuchulainn, Hound of Culainn, was first named Satana, Satata, Satanta, and was a reincarnation of the god Lu, and Fion, Fair himself, was first named Damin. Bran was a most suitable father for Gwion, for by this time he, was known as the giant ogre Vron, Guinevere's father. His name, which means Bran the Malign, Ocarvron, has apparently given English the word ogre through Perrault's fairy tales, and was credited by the bards with the invention of their art and with the ownership of the cauldron of Queridan, from which they said that the triple muse had been born. And Gwion's mother was Cerduin herself. It is a pity that one cannot be sure whether the ascription of the romance in the Iolo manuscript printed by the Welsh MMS Society to one Thomas ap Ennion Offerlade, a descendant of Gruffydd Gwyer, is to be trusted. The manuscript, called Anthony Powell of Linen Darts MS, reads authentically enough, unlike the other notices of Taliesin printed by Lady Guest on Iolo Morganwig's authority in her notes to the romance of Taliesin. Taliesin, chief of the bards, the son of Saint Hewin of Caerleon upon Usk, was invited to the court of Urin Reg at Abeloachar. He, with Elphin, the son of Urin, being once fishing at sea in a skin coracle, an Irish pirate ship seized him and his coracle and bore him away towards Ireland. But while the pirates were at the height of their drunken mirth, Taliesin pushed his coracle to the sea and got into it himself, with a shield in his hand, which he found in the ship, and with which he rowed the coracle until it verged the land. But the waves breaking then in wild foam, he lost his hold on the shield, so that he had no alternative but to be driven at the mercy of the sea, in which state he continued for a short time, when the coracle stuck to the point of a pole in the wire of Gwyndno, lord of Ceredigion, in Abergavenny, and in that position he was found at the ebb by Gwyndno's fishermen, by whom he was interrogated, and when it was ascertained that he was a bard and the tutor of Elphin, the son of Urin, Hagd, the son of Sineverich, I too have a son named Elphin, said Gwyndno. Be thou a bard and teacher to him also, and I will give thee lands in free tenure. The terms were accepted, and for several successive years he spent his time between the courts of Urin Raheg and Gwyndno, called Gwyndno Garahir, lord of the lowland Santrid, but after the territory of Gwendendenno, he became overwhelmed by the sea. Taliesin was invited by the Emperor Arthur to his court at Caerleon upon Usk, where he became lightly celebrated for poetic genius and useful meritorious sciences. After Arthur's death, he retired to the estate given to him by Gwendendenno, taking Elphin, the son of that prince, under his protection. It was from this account that Thomas, the son of Eneon, Offerade, descended from Grufrid Gwyr. God damn, these are some hard words. Formed his romance of Taliesin, the son of Cerdwin, Elphin, the son of Godno, Rune, the son of Malgwyn, Gwynedd, and the operations of the Cauldron of Cerwyn. I'm not stopping. I will bluster and fumble fuck my way through this entire book. I do not give a shit. So if you don't like it, get the fuck out. It ain't changing. That's all I'm saying. Where was I? If this is a genuine medieval document, not an 18th century forgery, it refers to a muddled tradition about the 6th century poet Taliesin and accounts for the finding of the divine child in the Wear near Abderdovey rather than anywhere else. But probably Gwion was more than one person, for the poem Ur Windle Vrath, which is given in full in chapter 9, Great, is ascribed in the Penrod MS to Jonas Athraw, the doctor of Minerva, St. David's, who lived in the 13th century. A complimentary reference to the See of St. David's concealed in the Hans Taliesin supports this description. Minerva is the Latin form of the original name of the place, Hen Menu, the old bush, which suggests the cult of Hawthorne, of a Hawthorne goddess. Dr. Williams explains the confused state of the text of the poems contained in the romance by suggesting that they are the surviving work of the Awen Gideon of the 12th century, described by Gardulus Cambrinus. There are certain persons in Cambria whom you will find nowhere else called Awen Gideon, or people inspired. When consulted upon any doubtful event, they roar out violently, are rendered beside themselves, and become, as it were, possessed by a spirit. They do not deliver the answer to what is required in a connected manner, but the person who skillfully observes them will find, after many preambles and many nugatory and incoherent though ornamental speeches, the desired explanation conveyed in some turn of word. They are then roused from their ecstasy as from a deep sleep, and, as it were, by violence compelled to return to their proper senses. After having answered the question, they do not recover until violently shaken by other people, nor can they remember the replies they have given. If consulted a second or third time upon the same point, they will make use of expressions totally different. Perhaps they speak by means of fanatic or ignorant spirits. These gifts are usually conferred upon them in dreams. Some seem to have sweet milk and honey poured on their lips. Others fancy that a written schedule is applied to their mouths, and on awakening they publicly declare that they have received this gift. They invoke during their prophecies the true and living God and the Holy Trinity, and pray that they may not by their sins be prevented from finding the truth. These prophets are found only among those Britons who are descended from the Trojans. The Awen Gideon, the popular minstrels, may indeed have disguised their secrets by a pretense of being possessed by spirits, as the Irish poets are recorded to have done by buffoonery, and they may have induced these ecstasies by toadstool eating. But Cad Cadu, Angar Savinagdod, and all the other strange poems of the Book of Taliesin medley read like nonsense only because the texts have been deliberately confused, doubtless as a precaution against their being denounced by heretical by some church officer. This explanation would also account for the presence of simple, dull religious pieces in the medley, plausible guarantees of orthodoxy. Unfortunately, a large part of the original material seems to be lost, which makes a confident restoration of the remainder difficult. When an authoritative version of the text and an authoritative English translation has been published, none is so far available, else I should have used it. The problem will be simpler. But that the Alwyndian were descended from the Trojans is an important statement of Gerald's. He means that they inherited their traditions not from the Cymry, but from the earlier inhabitants of Wales, whom the Cymry dispossessed. The context of the 13th century version of the romance can be reconstructed from Gwion Jones, as written by Philip Bredid of Llanbadarn Fawr, and the poem in which he mentions his contention with the beard splitting deed vulgar rhymesters as to who should first present song to Prince Ray's Ilunik on Christmas Day. Hold on. How long's it been? It's been 16 minutes. I've bludgeoned you people long enough.